So I want to start off today by just telling you a little story. It was late August of 2005, and I had just started my freshman year down at Campbell University. And while things were going great for me down in Little Buies Creek, 1,000 miles away, the most destructive hurricane in generations was ravaging the Gulf Coast. Many of you remember Hurricane Katrina, of course, and as that storm came on shore, it killed over 1,000 people, and it ruined the homes, lives, and economy of an already struggling region. As I was in my dorm room watching the devastation and its aftermath unfold live on TV, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was seeing stuff that you couldn't even picture putting in a movie or a TV show. New Orleans, the entire city, it seemed like, was underwater. People were being airlifted off of their homes, and children and the elderly alike were left crying in the streets. I can't begin to explain how I felt watching this tragedy unfold right before my very eyes. But as I watched it, I came to this realization that, Tyler, you've got to do something about this. Now, I admit when that realization swept over me, it sort of came out of nowhere. And my initial response to it was to ask this question, me? Me? What could I possibly do about these people and their suffering 1,000 miles away? I couldn't fly helicopters. I sure couldn't apply first aid. I couldn't rebuild their homes or really do anything else that could help these people in a real and tangible way. It was because of that for weeks and then months, I struggled with what I could do to help these people 1,000 miles away. But each time an opportunity to help came up, my mind was suddenly flooded with all sorts of questions, doubts, and fears. You ever been in one of those moments where you feel like you need or want to do something, and then this little inner voice starts doubting everything you want to do? Some of the things I encountered were statements like, well, Tyler, you don't know how to go down there and do those things. And then, of course, the ones that say, well, you've been watching the news, can't you see how dangerous it is down there? And then the one that always sort of finds its way into my mind in different circumstances, this one that says, well, there are other people who are going to go help, and they're way more qualified than you, so you don't need to do anything. Let them do it. You stay put. Let them do it. While these doubts, fears, and questions seemed insurmountable at the time, something refused to let me give up and give in. And that wasn't my will or my stamina or my perseverance. I can tell you that is very weak. And because of that, I can tell you that something, my friends, was the Holy Spirit. And while He had called me to be in prayer for these people 1,000 miles away, He was also calling me to action. Because of that, I didn't have a choice in the matter anymore. I had to go and help. I couldn't shut my eyes to this devastation any longer. And whether or not I'd know what to do when I got down there, I knew one thing very clearly in that moment. God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. After that realization, God started opening doors for me to be able to go down to this area of need. The first door opened up when Campbell decided to sponsor a spring break mission trip to Gulfport. And the second door opened up when a kind and a caring church decided to send a couple of their men along to help us willing but really, really inexperienced college kids. And so it was in March of 2006, a couple dozen college students from Campbell University and a handful of men from Forest Hills Baptist Church in Raleigh loaded up their gear and took that long drive down to Gulfport, Mississippi. And I just had never been on a road trip that long in my entire life, especially in one day. Never go from here to Gulfport in one day. You see some stuff after a while. But after a long day of driving, we arrived, and even after all this time leading up to this moment, I still didn't know how to do the work that we were preparing to do that week. And I had no background on the people that we were going to be serving. All I knew for sure was that God had called me to go and help in any way I could. And as I fell asleep on my air mattress in the bottom of a really rinky-dink church on the bad side of town, I hope to God that calling would be enough to see me through the week. Friends, let me tell you something. It didn't matter that I didn't know how to use a circular saw. It didn't matter that I didn't know how to replace a roof. It didn't matter that I didn't know how to best counsel people in disaster situations. Whether I knew it or not, God had already given me the skills, gifts, and flexibility to do what needed to be done that week. And sure, absolutely nothing went exactly according to plan, and that's okay, that's mission trips for you. But nonetheless, the work we set out to do was accomplished, and lives there and lives here were changed. And while I didn't walk away from that week 12 years ago a more skilled carpenter or more capable counselor, I walked away with a realization that changed my life forever. And that realization was this: you don't need anything more than what you already have in order to glorify God by blessing others. You don't need anything more than what you already have in order to glorify God by blessing others. Have you ever noticed this thing about humans where we spend more time obsessing over the things we don't have rather than using and appreciating the things we do have? Well, those obsessions often lead us to believe that we always need more in order to be effective for God. We need more knowledge, skills, income, and abilities to make a difference because somewhere deep down inside of ourselves, we've bought into this lie that says who we are and what we have at this moment isn't good enough for God. That's one of the great lies that Satan has sown into the fabric of our society. It's a lie that's designed to keep us focused on what we don't have instead of using what we do have. Friends, I want to tell you today, don't waste your time pursuing gifts you don't need, but instead just get to work using what the good Lord gave you. If we keep waiting around for the day where we finally have enough time, energy, and skills to make the difference we want to make, guess what? We're going to die disappointed. We're going to die disappointed. We're going to die having squandered the great gifts that God has already given us. All because we wanted to wait until we had more. Friends, it's not promised that you'll live to see a day where Jesus gives you more than you already have right now. All you're given for sure is today. All you have for sure is what you already have right now at this moment. And you know what? In God's eyes, that's enough. In God's eyes, that's enough. Now, as many of you know from my time here over the years, I'm a big fan of Mr. Rogers, the old children's TV show host. I've spoken about him a couple of times in my sermons and other opportunities too. But the way that Mr. Rogers used to end each of his TV shows was that he would look right into the camera and he would say these words to the boys and girls watching at home. He would say, "You've made this day a special day by just your being you. There's no person in the whole world like you, and I like you just the way you are." At the end of each show, Mr. Rogers was letting the children in on a holy secret. God had created them with a special purpose, with special gifts. And He'd given them the opportunity to make that day special, all by using what they already had. They didn't need more of anything. They didn't need to be somebody else. All they had to be was themselves. And all they had to use was what they already had. Friends, I'm sorry if anyone's ever told you that you're not enough for God. I'm sorry if anyone's ever looked at your age, abilities, gender, race, income, or whatever and said, "Sorry, you don't have what it takes." As much as those denials might hurt, no one, and I mean absolutely no one, can take away that which God has blessed you with. No one can take away the calling that God's placed on your life to use what you have for a glory greater than your own. Friends, today and every day, who you are and what you have is enough for God. So because of that, don't waste your time pursuing gifts you don't need, but instead just get to work using what the good Lord gave you. And you know, what the good Lord gave you is going to be different for each and every person here. As I look at around this room today, there's absolutely nothing cookie cutter about the faces I see staring back at me. I see people of all ages, backgrounds, incomes, and abilities. And even though we come together around a common mission of seeking, serving, and sharing Christ, we all go about fulfilling that mission in very different ways. And while outsiders might look at gatherings like this and think that the goal of Christian community is conformity, we know that nothing could be further from the truth. And that's because Christian community celebrates the uniqueness of each individual, and it empowers them to use the gifts that God has given them, whatever they may be. Now, we encourage and we nurture these gifts and abilities because it's through them that God is at work in our lives. Listen to what 1 Corinthians 12, verses 4 through 6 has to say about this. There are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in everyone, it is the same God at work. Regardless of what your skills, gifts, or abilities may be, Jesus Christ is able to work through those things so that you, of all people, can share His love with others. The only question is, will you? Will you? Will you let the light of Christ shine through your talents and your gifts, or will you keep that light hidden within yourself? You know, sometimes when we're made aware of a situation and we fail to see how God has positioned us to meet that need, what do we wind up doing? Well, we wind up probably doing nothing. And when we do, our gifts remain hidden and the love of Christ is withheld. It's all because we're not looking right. We're not understanding how God is positioning us to be a difference maker in this world. And believe you me, out of everybody, I really understand how easy it is to pass the buck when we're presented with something that we feel woefully unprepared to handle. But in spite of that, I also believe that if God's made you aware of a need, He's made you aware because somehow, some way, you can use your gifts to help meet that need. Time for another little story. It was back in the fall of 2016, and this time it involves a different hurricane. Hurricane by the name of Matthew. Much like Katrina, this storm flooded and ruined a region that was already struggling to begin with. And there is probably no place harder hit by the storm here in North Carolina than Robeson County, where I'm from. And because of that, there were tremendous needs all over the place. I mean, it was already high poverty, low income to begin with. You throw a storm like that in there with the flooding and the winds and the devastation and the aftermath, it's just the worst case scenario. Let's just be real here about that. And because of that, there were absolutely tremendous needs scattered all over the county. There was work upon work upon work to be done, and it's still that way today, as a matter of fact. But I'm not going to talk about all those different needs. I'm going to talk about one need in particular that involved a guy named Darius and his great-grandmother. See, Darius has a disability which confines him to a wheelchair. And because of Darius's family situation growing up, his 90-year-old great-grandmother has been his primary caregiver and guardian for most of his life. Back when Darius was in the 4th grade, his teacher happened to be my mom. And I'm just going to brag on her for a moment because it's Mother's Day. Why not? But if you've ever had the chance to meet my mom, she comes here sometimes throughout the year, you can tell pretty much instantaneously just how big her heart is. And so when Darius was in her class, she just felt really called by God to try and help he and his great-grandmother out whenever she could. And even though it's been a long time since Darius was in her class, she still keeps up with them and visits them a couple of times during the year. It's just a really great witness to me, especially too. Well, jump ahead a couple of years, and after Hurricane Matthew hit, my mom got a phone call from Darius's great-grandmother. And she called her because the trailer they lived in, they had a wheelchair ramp so that Darius could get in and out of the house. But because of the storm, that ramp was ruined, and therefore, Darius was now a prisoner inside his own home. His great-grandmother said a lot of things to my mom that day. But one thing she wanted to get across to her was this: Beth, we need help. Now, even though my papa didn't raise any wimps, my mom couldn't go over there and fix this wheelchair ramp on her own. As much as she wanted to, she just couldn't do it. But even so, she decided to use the gifts at her disposal to try and meet this need that she had been presented with. Now, my mom's one of the most resourceful ladies I know, and so after exhausting all the options available to her in town, she did the next thing, which was to call me. Now, my mom knows me probably better than anybody, and she knows that I didn't know how to rebuild this wheelchair ramp either. But she knew that I might know some people who could. As it happens, I happen to know some of the staff over at the Red Springs Mission Camp. Youth, you're going there this summer. It's going to be awesome. Shameless plug. And I knew that from time to time, they would have groups come into the mission camp whose purpose would be to go out into the area and to build wheelchair ramps for those who needed it the most. So after reaching out to the mission camp, I was able to connect the dots between them and Darius's great-grandmother. And in spite of all the recovery work that was going on in the area, this is just a month after this hurricane hit, even in spite of all of that, that very next week, there was a group of Baptist men over at her house putting in a brand new wheelchair ramp for her great-grandson. And because of that, Darius was a prisoner no more. Friends, I could say a whole lot about that story, but I'm just going to say this. That's God at work. That's God at work through and through. And the most amazing thing is that He didn't work through just one gift or one person to meet that need. He worked through all sorts of gifts and all sorts of different people. He used my mom's gift of relationship building. He used my gift of networking, for lack of a better term. He used the mission camp's ability to resource out needs to those who could help meet them. And He used the abilities of those people who showed up with lumber and wood to actually build that wheelchair ramp. That's an amazing story of how God works through all sorts of different things to work things together for His good. And you know, none of the people involved in meeting this need, they didn't have to become somebody else in order to meet it. They didn't have to acquire something that they didn't already have. Instead, each of us just offered ourselves as a living sacrifice to God, and He worked through the different gifts that we'd been blessed with in order to meet this need. I can tell you with no hint of anything else that what the people in this story did, it wasn't special. It wasn't unique to us or our situation. Just as easily as we used our gifts for a glory greater than our own, friends, each and every one of you can and should do the same. When you become aware of a need that you feel woefully unprepared to handle just like we did, take the words of Jesus to heart and don't worry. Don't worry, because if God's decided to reveal this particular need to you, He's done so because He knows that you can do something about it. Simply put, God has faith in you. He knows you. He knows your abilities and your gifts. And He knows the gospel impact you'll be able to make if you just get to work using what the good Lord gave you. Friends, the message I want to send you home with today is this. You don't need more of anything to be enough for somebody else in need. All you have to be is yourself. All you have to use is what you already have. There's no need to wait until you have more age, income, or abilities before you start using what you have for a glory greater than your own. Folks, I'm here to tell you that God looks at you as you are right now. And He says that who you are and what you have is enough for me. That being the case, don't waste this precious time that God has blessed you with pursuing gifts that you don't need. But instead, get to work using what the good Lord gave you for a glory greater than your own.